Oh, we got some rumors going around about the Jets GM and head coach situation. It looks like the Vikings might be losing some personnel. Jets! All right, gang, welcome in. I'm excited to get into this. We're talking a little Jets GM, head coach, and offensive coordinator action coming by way of Connor Hughes. This is a rumor going out there. Connor Hughes initially tweeted something about Vrabel going to the Patriots and people thinking that's where that's going to happen. A commenter says, if that's the case, give me Flores and McCown. And then he responds with the group that I've heard, Grigson GM, Flores head coach, McCown OC, which means Brick Johnson is reading my tweets, and that is why the Jets are going to get these guys. I sent that out last week. But no, I honestly don't mind this pairing. I really don't. I know people are going to kind of get hung up on the Grigson thing. I'll get into that in just a minute here. Something interesting that happened today as well. Grigson's supposed to interview for the GM position today, and then Flores set to interview for the head coach position next week. And this was the song they were listening to while talking on the sideline at Vikings practice today. So if you don't know what that song is, that is Empire State of Mind. A little tip to the hat of the New York Jets, potentially with the pairing of one Ryan Grigson and Brian Flores. Now, as far as these guys are concerned, Josh McCown, we know him. Uncle Josh, he's a former Jet quarterback coach for Sam Darnold out in Minnesota. Just a journeyman quarterback. I love Josh McCown. I really do. And I think for an offensive coordinator, even though he hasn't called plays before, I like his pedigree. He's been on 12 different teams. That means at least 12 different offenses, let alone how many offenses have changed while he's been on those teams in general. And he learned under Frank Reich and Kevin O'Connell. Like, that's a pretty damn good pedigree as far as an up-and-coming offensive coordinator goes. Like, a lot of guys don't even have, like, half of that kind of experience. So McCown is OC. No issues there whatsoever. Brian Flores, a lot of people kind of get hung up on the Ryan Fitzpatrick comments that we heard earlier this week or last week, where it's like, oh, he runs his ship like a dictator. Not a lot of coaches or players really liked him. Tua had a bunch of problems with him. The issues that they had while they were down there. Tua didn't even want to be a captain at one point because he didn't want to deal with Flores more consistently. Like, that definitely makes me feel a little like uncomfortable. And from my understanding is Flores has apologized about some of the Tua stuff that's gone on. He did want Justin Herbert at the time of that draft. Now, one thing to consider with Flores is the quality that you get from the players that play for him. All 3 years he was down in Miami, his teams overachieved. That first year, they thought he might go like totally winless. They wound up winning 5 games. And then the next 2 years, they wind up exceeding expectations. The final year of the season, they did not have a good start, but they ended in 9 games going 8-1 down the stretch, and they fired him. I was like, this is crazy. You're firing a head coach that just went 8-1 down the stretch here for you. That was a surprise for me. I think Brian Flores is a very good head coach. I think he's a very disciplined head coach. I think his defenses are incredibly stout, and I think when you look at the penalties that are gained or penalties against his teams, they're very, very low. One of the lowest in the league. Jets, one of the highest in the league. We're not first in a lot of categories, but first in penalties is something not to be proud of. You look at that, offense, defense, special teams, those are the 3 aspects of the game, but that hidden fourth part that I always say is the penalties. Games that can be won, yardage gained and lost, first downs gained and lost because of penalties. So if you can minimize those penalties on your side, you are giving less opportunities with the football in the hands of your opponent, and you have better opportunities to win. Jets wound up losing, 6 or 7 games by 1 score, and late in the fourth quarter too. Like, you can't tell me penalties weren't a major factor this past year. So I like these aspects from Brian Flores. And I also like, one, Brooklyn-born. I think he's going to want to come here. I think he's probably going to have a pretty pissed off demeanor towards the Dolphins, which is like fucking great as a Jet fan. I don't hate any team more than I dislike the Dolphins. So if our head coach can do the same thing, that's fucking perfect. I'm all about that. And on top of that, spent some time with Mike Tomlin, who I consider one of the best head coaches in the NFL. And then now in Minnesota, his players seem to like him, and the Minnesota Vikings fans don't want to lose him as a defensive coordinator. So I really like Brian Flores as a Jets head coach. He was my number 2 option if Vrabel was not going to be a New York Jet. I think the biggest part of this equation is the concern over Ryan Grigson. Ryan Grigson as GM, he was a former GM for the Indianapolis Colts 2012 to 2016. He drafted Andrew Luck, so not really like tip of the cap. I mean, that was like the obvious pick in that draft. And then he winds up not putting an offensive line around him. And that's the major criticism, because just 3 years after Grigson gets fired, Andrew Luck up and retires. Like, you got to have an offensive line around your franchise quarterback. Dude retires at 29 years old. That is a major, major red flag for a GM. Now, he is the senior vice president of player personnel for the Minnesota Vikings. And from what it seems like, even Pat McAfee did not like Ryan Grigson, but it seems like there's more like conversation happening. And it seems like a lot of the bad stuff that McAfee didn't like about him seems to maybe be fixable or resolved based on this clip.
I think he's a guy that had learned from how he operated the first time he was a general manager, had a lot of success. I think the vision that he would want to have for his team and what he wanted to have for our team is one that would be very, very successful. I think the way he went about doing it was not good. Like, you have to be able to deal with people, like, whenever you're in that particular position. And I think it wasn't his strength at that time. But after talking to him and him even having that conversation with me, I think, and then hearing people around him, feels like he has learn from it. Just like we talk about these head coaches who get a second opportunity at it.
Yep. It's
like whenever you get an opportunity and you're too young, maybe, and we're going to talk to Michael Lombardi in the next hour. I think he'll probably have something to say about this. But when you get an opportunity and you're young, you have this vision on how it's going to go. And then whenever it just all crashes out from underneath you, just absolutely underneath you, and then you have to like rebuild yourself back up, there's probably a way to go about doing things differently. And in my eyes, I think with the style of team that he would want, if he was able to get those things proper, which are definitely fixable, I think he'd be a great GM.
I dealt with Ryan Grigson when he was with the Colts. We got deals done for guys like T.Y. Hilton at the time, which was his first extension. I've seen him work with the Vikings as their assistant GM, working with 𝐂𝐻𝐧𝐤𝐬, the general manager. The Vikings brought in Aaron Jones, Andrew Van Ginkel, Jonathan Grenard. They extended our guy, Josh Metellus. They extended Christian Darrisaw. They brought back Dalton Risner. Reisner, we like dealing with the Vikings, and the reason for that is Coach Flores. Coach Flores is a stud. If someone can get Grigson and Flores as a package,
I think that's being pitched right now, isn't it?
You're going to win.
That's being talked about. I don't know about it being pitched, but I think that's being talked about.
Grigson's a stud.
The other part of that clip that I really like, that's Drew Rosenhaus, agent for like a ton of players in the NFL. And if you're talking about a guy that likes working with Ryan Grigson and the contracts they got done both in Indianapolis and in Minnesota, it's probably a good thing that players and their agents like working with that guy, because we're going to have a lot of contracts coming up. Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner, Jermaine Johnson, Breece Hall, like literally a bunch of guys, AVT coming up. If you have guys that work well with this agent and his whole like agent sphere or whatever, like this is a good thing. It means other agents probably have the same type of experience with Ryan Grigson. So while we don't love Ryan Grigson for like his Indianapolis Colts time, and maybe you have some concerns about the offensive line, the Jets have 4 of the 5 offensive linemen figured out. So like, and they're all young, like Simpson, Olu, AVT, Tippmann. They're all young. They're all like sub 25 or 26 years old. They could be here for the next 10 years. So find a right tackle. It's less concern. I don't know. I'm interested to hear what you guys think. What do you think of this particular pairing? These 3 guys, is this the one you would like? Do you want something different? Let me know in the comment section down below. And as always, go Jets.